Hey fearsome friends, I'd like to introduce the very talented Papa Scare, so please be sure to check him out. I will leave his channel link in the description below. Now tonight I have some pretty disturbing stories for you. I have put warnings next to each one that contains graphic content, so you can skip them if you wish. So sit back, relax, and get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in.
A little bit of backstory. I went to Miami earlier this year. Didn't know a lot of people there, but I still went. I was 20 at the time and not really jacked, but I know how to hold myself. I got there on a Saturday, and I knew that weekend nights at the beach are where the fun things happen. Night eventually rolled around, and I took an Uber to South Beach. I walked around for about an hour and a half and found a bench to sit down at to check my phone. As I'm sitting down minding my own business, a person walks up to me and sits on the same bench as me. I didn't think much of it. The place was packed, being that it's a weekend night. A few minutes pass by, and he starts up a conversation with me. I will refer to him as Dude. He seemed like a chill person, around the same age as me, average build. I'm usually really good at reading vibes, and I didn't get any negative vibes from him. I tell him that I'm new here, that I had arrived in Miami and that I didn't really know anyone here. That was probably my first mistake. My phone had started to die, and I also needed to use the restroom. But the bars and restaurants there won't let you use the restroom unless you are a customer. So I was shit out of luck. The dude told me that he has a place not far away from here and offered to let me come over to use the restroom and charge my stuff for a few minutes. Looking back now, I should have declined the offer, but I did take him up on the offer. We get to his place, and as soon as I enter, I got really odd vibes. His house was just giving off negative energy, but I don't want to pay it any attention. He tells me where I can plug my stuff in and shows me the way to the bathroom. So after using the bathroom, I walked back into the living room and sat down. My plan was to let my stuff charge for 15 to 20 minutes, then leave. The dude sits down beside me, and we actually had a pretty good conversation at first. He just seemed like a chill person who was trying to be nice. About 5 minutes after he sat down beside me, that's when things took a turn. He gets up, walks to the kitchen and pours 2 glasses of vodka, walks back to me and hands me one. I didn't want to come off as rude, so I took the glass and just held it. I wasn't trying to get drunk, especially around someone I just met. After he realized I wasn't drinking, he kept on trying to get me to drink. He kept saying stuff like,
"Come on, I just want to help you relax some."
I told him I didn't want to drink, and he got visibly upset. He started saying stuff like,
"I let you into my house and you can't take a shot with me?"
At this point, my gut was telling me to get the fuck out of there. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure his intentions weren't as pure as I had originally thought. As I was trying to figure out a way to leave without upsetting him, he starts to compliment my looks. As someone who was sexually assaulted 2 years ago, my fight or flight response was kicking in. I got up and acted like I was looking for my wallet in my backpack. I acted like I couldn't find it and that I probably left it at the beach. I said that I was going to walk back to the beach and that I would return when I found my wallet. And no, I definitely didn't plan on returning. I packed my stuff, and as I was doing so, the dude started laughing. It was such a demonic laugh, I'll never be able to get it out of my head. I bolt it out of the door and get to the sidewalk and start walking away. I'm not even off the block yet, and I hear his door open back up. The dude starts speed walking towards me as if he was following me, while he was still laughing demonically. My first thought was, okay, well, this is a serial killer. I'm about to be killed. I started to run. I don't know exactly how far I ran, but it was at least 5 blocks. Once I knew he wasn't following me anymore, I spent $10 on an Uber to get me far away from the area. The night was still young and I knew the nightlife would still be active on the beach. So I went back to the beach, just about 10 miles away from my original location, just to make sure if he went back there looking for me, that he wouldn't find me. To the dude who was trying to push himself on me, screw you.
I live in an apartment complex in a quiet neighbourhood with my girlfriend and our dogs. A neighbour will get the occasional domestic disturbance call for an argument or loud party, but never anything particularly crazy. About a year ago, I was taking my lab outside early in the morning when we were approached by a dirty-looking guy who got out of a run-down pickup truck with no license plates. My dog is 12 and has always been the sweetest towards other humans, but for some reason she went absolutely nuts at the mere sight of this guy. Something definitely felt off, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up at about the same time my dog showed her hackles. He waved to me and asked if I knew what apartment the girl who drives the white Equinox lives in, because he gave her a ride home last night. Needless to say, there were a few red flags here. 1. Why are you pointing to her car that's in the parking lot if you took her home? And 2. Even if I knew, I'm not telling you. If you took her home and she wouldn't even let you in or tell you where she lived, that tells me all I need to know. I told him I didn't know, and I was sorry I couldn't help him. My dog still hadn't stopped barking either. But apparently that answer wasn't good enough, as he followed me into my building and said, "Come on, buddy, I just need to ask her something." I reiterated that I didn't know her and I couldn't help him, but that still wasn't good enough. He began following me up the stairs, repeating himself about the girl who drove the Equinox. At this point, it's taking everything I have to keep my dog from ripping his face off. I finally managed to pick her up and walk up the stairs, and as I got onto my floor and was opening the door to my apartment, he came through the door that separates us from the stairs and began asking in a more aggressive tone. Bear in mind, I'm taller than this guy, covered in tattoos, worked out fairly regularly at the time, and had a large dog who was snarling at him. I'm far from badass, but I'm not usually the type of person someone targets to harass. Up until this point, I was speaking to him very politely. There was clearly something off about him, and I just wanted him to go away. But messing with someone at their home is crossing the line. He kept approaching me as I was opening the door, so I finally told him, "Dude, if you come through my door, I'm gonna blow your brains out." This wasn't a bluff. I keep a handgun by the door due to some run-ins in my past. That, along with my tone of voice, was apparently enough for him to get the message, as I watched him run out the door and back to his vehicle from my window. I noticed the apartment manager, and they said they'd contact the police and figure out who drove a white Equinox in my building, so they could alert her as well. I have no idea what he intended to do had he gotten into my apartment, or what his intentions were with the girl he was looking for. I'm just glad my dog has a great sense of character. I'm writing this the day after it happened, and I'm honestly still shaken up about it. It was around 2 a.m, and I was leaving a buddy's house after a get-together to catch up. I've done this walk at least a few hundred times at all hours of the day and late at night, so I was fairly confident of my safety. The walk was short, maybe 25 to 30 minutes more or less, and I was wearing a backpack with the random stuff inside it, so I had a bit of a heavy load. I was a little stoned too, considering I'd smoked a bit before leaving, so I decided to listen to something on YouTube as I went. I wanted to switch things up from listening to music, so I decided to listen to scary stories. I loaded up a corpse husband video and put in my headphones. When I kid you not, 2 minutes into the video, I heard a voice behind me. "Hey you, half and half." I instantly knew he meant me, because of my hair. I have it split-dyed, half black and half blonde. I casually looked behind me, still walking, and I saw who'd called out to me. There were 3 men following me, and all of them were tall and dressed in dark clothes, and I couldn't tell, but one of them was holding a pipe or a bat. "Stop walking and drop your bag. We have a gun," one of them said. My heart was in my throat. I was terrified. I looked around ahead of me and thankfully spotted a police officer amongst a few cars in the 4-way traffic a few dozen yards ahead of us. I silently prayed for it to turn down my road, but it continued forward. I zoned out looking at the police car and hadn't noticed the men getting closer. I then heard one of them getting very close, so I took off as fast as I could. I ran across the 4-way near the high school and hopped a few fences and ran through backyards, anything to get as far away as possible. I got a few blocks away and got to the road, only to be greeted by a police officer. "Get on the ground now," he shouted, and he had a taser drawn and a flashlight in my eyes. I immediately complied and got to the ground. He asked me why I was running and hopping fences at 2 a.m, and I told him I was trying to get away from people trying to attack me. He paused for a second and said, "Stand up." I did so, and he looked at me and said, "Were you just walking up Bridge Street?" "Yes, officer, I was." "Were you the cop I saw with the cars?" I replied. He nodded and told me he'd seen the men behind me, and I told him my routing, so he understood why I was trespassing through so many yards. He told me I wasn't in trouble since I was fleeing for safety. Then the officer had me describe the men as much as possible and proceeded to radio everything in. Afterwards, he followed me home in his car, no more than 2 blocks away. I got home safely and thanked him, and needless to say, I didn't sleep much that night.
Not my story, but my dad's. Around 40 years ago, when my dad was still in college, he moved quite a ways from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam to New Haven, Connecticut for college. He wanted to be near as possible to his college, but also wanted to overlook the city skyline. He had already received the Form 120 and went to the consulate at the US Embassy to try and get an M student visa. He was a first-generation immigrant, and though he had taken a fair amount of English classes in Vietnam, he wasn't fluent and knew nothing about housing in America. This is why he went the cheap route and rented out a podunk apartment somewhere near Pine Tree Drive in West Haven. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but I mean it was really shady looking. His landlord, as he told me later, gave off some serious red flags that he sort of brushed off because the apartment was only $250 a month. Firstly, the landlord's abode was directly next door to that of my dad's, and during his first night there, while he was getting unpacked, he heard a high-pitched screeching and weird opera music. Again, he brushed it off, for the same reason as said above, and also because he was very tired. The next morning when he awoke, he noticed a chair by his bed that wasn't there before, and when he went to the bathroom, his toilet seat was up, though he recalled putting it down. Not only that, but his door was unlocked. He again brushed it off because he didn't want to stir up anything with his landlord by asking if he had come into his room, or by asking if it had been broken into, then referring that the apartment was insecure. He also wanted to explore West Haven, as his college year did not begin until late August. He had come about 3 weeks early. As he left, he specifically remembered locking his door behind him. But when he returned after a few hours out, he noticed that not only had the door been unlocked, but it was slightly ajar. This went on for weeks, until his college year began. Things slightly moved from where he had left them. Articles of food missing from his fridge, and other weird happenings. Finally, my dad had had enough. One night he decided to stay awake until very late, and tried to catch whoever was doing this red-handed. That night he finished his homework, and then got into bed. But he remained awake, and sure enough, at around 2 a.m, he sees his door handle turning, and a hand sliding through. My dad froze. His blood ran cold. He then saw the landlord creep in and take some eggs from the fridge. Not only that, but the landlord then went to the bathroom, coming out a couple of minutes afterwards. He then slipped out once again, leaving the door unlocked. This creeped my dad out like hell, but for some stupid reason he still decided to stay at the apartment for a few more nights, before he finally confronted the landlord. Money and wanting to save it does some stupid things to the brain, I guess. This was before mobile phones and even decent cameras that didn't cost $100+. So my dad had literally no way to get evidence to show the cops, besides mere accusations. The next night, he once more heard the screeching and weird opera music coming from the landlord's room, and he decided to take matters into his own hands. That weekend, when his landlord went out shopping, he broke into his landlord's room, and what he found there was seriously fucking disturbing. First of all, he found some weird sex doll, but when he investigated further, he found an old Kodak camera. Under this was some extremely low-quality pictures of him in bed sleeping. He noped the fuck out of there, taking the pictures with him, and went to the police station. He moved out of there shortly, and he later heard that this same landlord had scared other residents of the apartment off after hearing the odd screeching and opera music, and after seeing all of their things moved around. The building my dad lived in was since torn down, but my dad decided to just dorm at Sigma Chi. He had at first opted to stay away from fraternities because of the heavy partying. We never knew what happened to the landlord, only that he would be facing some prison time. I seriously hope he was never allowed to be a landlord again.
This happened when my sister and I were around 6 and 8. We are now 43 and 45, me being the eldest, and it is something that still haunts us occasionally. We had an amazing municipal swimming pool in our neighbourhood. South African summers in Johannesburg are hot and long, so the swimming pool was the ultimate destination. Joe was that adult that was always at the pool. He would swim lengths, practice diving, and tickle our feet under the water. Just typing this makes me feel nauseous. To this day, I still have issues with my feet being wet. Specifically, I am unable to leave cream on my feet. The sliminess makes me claustrophobic. I only realised the connection last year. Whenever we would sit on the edge of the pool with our feet hanging in, he would swim past all of us and tickle all our feet in a row. Now I can't remember all the details, but someone playfully screamed, "Oh no, Joe," and Joe did it again and sang, "Oh no, Joe, not again, Joe." We all laughed as kids do. Then he tickled our feet again and made us sing his new song. "Oh no, Joe, not again, Joe." It became a game. He would grab us under the water and we would sing. It went from feet tickling to chasing us and grabbing our waists under the water. That song never went away. One day at the pool, Joe told us he had this amazing farm just out of town, and he would like to take us to see his animals, his mieles, which is corn, and his own swimming pool. It sounded like heaven to all of us. He was talking to several children, boys and girls, and he told us to be at the swimming pool on Saturday, but not to tell our parents. We will go in his car. As soon as we got home, though, we told our dad everything, as we were so excited, and the farm sounded amazing. Our dad said absolutely not, and asked who this Joe was anyway. We told him that he was our friend at the pool, and plays with our feet, and chases us around the pool. My dad said that actually, maybe we could go, but he wanted to meet Joe first. Yay! The next day we went to the pool and we told Joe that we could go with him, but our dad wanted to meet him first. Joe was upset that we told our dad, but we said not to worry, our dad is cool. So Joe walked home with us. We only live about 5 blocks from the pool, and came to meet our dad. Now Joe is about 5'6", and my dad is 6'7", the personification of a gentle giant. My dad was very polite to Joe, and asked him loads of questions about the farm. Where is it exactly? How many kids are going? Has he spoken to other parents? Joe was cool as a cucumber. He answered the questions smoothly and confidently, and my dad ended by saying to Joe that he looked forward to seeing him at his farm on Saturday. I think we will have a great time. I will bring my girls though, and we will meet you there. Now the next part is a bit of a blur to me. I'm not sure how we ended up driving in convoy with about 3 other dads and their kids from the pool, but it was so exciting. My dad had the map book, leading the convoy to the best farm in the world. We drove about an hour out of town when we arrived at a derelict farmhouse. No animals, no mieles, no swimming pool. Just this run-down, isolated, scary-looking farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. I remember being really confused. My dad must have read the map book wrong. All the dads then huddled together, and we had no idea what they were saying, but they were really angry. We were angry too, as we were obviously lost, and it was the dad's fault. Everyone got back in their cars, and I started screaming at my dad about how he'd deliberately gotten us lost because he doesn't like Joe, and he didn't want us to have fun. My dad was silent and pensive, and after my tantrum, he said to my sister and I, in a very calm, deep voice, "Joe is a bad man. He was going to hurt all of you. He is the bad man your mum is always warning you about. My mother is obsessed with true crime. There is no farm, and I'm so happy you girls told me what was going on, because something bad could have happened to you." His strong voice broke in those last words. The gravity of his tone and the break in his voice made my sister and I realize immediately that he was right and we were in danger. We cried and apologized, and he made us promise to tell him if we ever saw Joe again. Joe stayed away from the pool for about a month, but as soon as we saw him come through the gate, we quickly got dressed and ran home. When my dad came home from golf, we told him Joe was at the pool again. Then the next day we went to the pool with our dad. We were swimming and my dad was sitting on one of the benches to the side. In walks Joe. He came to the edge of the pool and was calling to us. We refused to go to the edge and he was getting frustrated. My dad then got up and walked over to him. "Hey buddy, can I have a chat with you outside quickly?" Joe physically shrunk. My dad had his hand on Joe's shoulder and was guiding him out the pool. I can only imagine what my dad did and said to him. My dad is a gentleman, but don't mess with his girls. Joe was never seen again at our swimming pool. The memory is pretty fresh in my mind, so I hope writing it will help get rid of a bit of the grief and fear. Before I begin, if you have pets, particularly rabbits, please send them a pet from me. I regret not going to see them the morning before it happened. I, a 21-year-old of any pronoun, live with my mother far from town, but we have a few neighbours between the fields. We have no issues with the neighbours, and sometimes we help each other out. However, a few years ago, we had a problem with getting anonymous phone calls and destruction of our property, resulting in me trying to make my mum sell the house really below market price, because as I said, a woman can't take care of that much space alone. We have 2 dogs which keep the house safe, and a part of the house has a fence which is the dog zone. This is to the side of the house. So yesterday, as I was studying on my computer for my upcoming exams at around 12:15 p.m, I'd put the dogs outside, since they were play fighting a bit too loudly. A few minutes went by in silence, while I worked with quiet music playing, when suddenly, both dogs began barking really loudly. I was surprised, but thought someone must have been walking by on the road, and they were just getting overexcited. So I went to call them back in, when I saw that 3 of my 4 rabbits were all in a line just before the fence. My dogs went over to them and weren't even touching them, which was weird, because my dogs love corpses. If there is even just one dead animal on a walk, they will find them and try to chew them. I freaked out and called them back in, then stayed in the house with my dogs, just looking out of the windows upstairs to make sure our horse, donkey and goats were all right, which they were. I did this for about an hour, just waiting for my mum to come home, too scared to go see if my last rabbit was there, and going off on Discord with my brothers and friends, panicking completely. All of the rabbit houses were in ruin, as if someone had taken a hammer and gone off on them. Not one of them was still usable. The door for the dog zone, which was beside the rabbit houses, was opened wide, and that's where we found the last rabbit, also dead. We thought that maybe we'd forgotten to close the door, and the dogs had their way with them. But the rabbit houses were broken, which our dogs wouldn't have been able to do. My mum went to see the bodies, and there wasn't one bite or tooth mark, and it seemed that their necks had been broken by hand. Now I don't know who you are, but the person who attacked my 4 defenseless rabbits for no reason, I hope you rot in hell. A few years ago, I was waiting to meet a friend in a local park. He just showed up, and then we started walking down the steps of the bridge, when behind us was a man in a long black trench coat. I made some joke about the Matrix and watched him for a little while whilst not thinking much of it. He was bald and had black sunglasses on, which added to the look, and he looked very out of place, but otherwise just eccentric. But as we watched him, we became captivated. He walked in a dead straight line, forwards towards the park's wall, where a bunch of students were playing frisbee or football or something. He walked pretty much into the middle of them, stopped, then turned 90 degrees right and began walking again. The students looked a little perplexed, but continued on playing when he had moved. But my friend and I were too intrigued. We followed him at a distance as he began walking through the cobbled streets, continuing to make these strange 90-degree turns, despite the organic, bendy streets. It went on until he began to cross a different bridge, and we continued to follow him. We were on the right-hand side of the bridge, when I noticed after a few minutes that he had turned around and was now walking down the left-hand side, in the opposite direction, back to the side we had just come from. This freaked me out a little, because we weren't being especially stealthy, and I assumed he was aware we were following him, and tried to shake us off. We could have continued following him, but I was getting weirded out, and decided it was best if we continued across the bridge and forgot about it. My friend hadn't noticed he had turned around, so when he thought we'd lost him, I told him and explained I was freaked out. He wasn't too bothered by it, and so we just went on with the plans we had before seeing the man. I think about this a reasonable amount, and don't know what to make of the weird behaviour combined with the unusual look. I have been trying to find messages I may have sent other friends about this, closer to when it happened, to see if there was any more information I had since forgotten, perhaps about him using a phone or something. But I haven't yet been successful, and will update if I do find something. It's obviously not the weirdest thing that ever happened, but it still plays on my mind.
I'm a 22-year-old who lives in New York City. I love the city. It's home. I was born in Manhattan, lived in LA and Chicago for a few years, but there's no place like the Big Apple. I worked as a tour guide, and it's not the best job, but it allowed for me to move from the dangerous area of Fort Greene in Brooklyn to around Kips Bay, where the college I'm attending is, SVA to be exact. At the SVA, I had a student job as the librarian's assistant. I worked after my classes are done for the day. It's normally easy and the shifts are from 3:30 to 5. After 5, I go down to Lower Manhattan to get something to eat with my friends, or maybe go to the bar, specifically the Attaboy bar, and drink till about 9 p.m. I've given you enough information you'll need for the rest of the story, so let's begin. It was April 1st of this year. I finished my classes and went to work at the library. It was about 4:52 when these 5 kids walked in. They were freshmen at the SVA, and I recognized them. Aaron Bermuda, Kyle Birmingham, Sarah Millers, Jessica Vasquez, and Alexander Scott. I knew them all because I had classes together with them and they were troublemakers. The second they walked in, I mentally tracked them. They disappeared behind the poetry shelf. They tipped it over and it came crashing down, knocking over fiction, non-fiction, and history sections. I yelled as they ran the hell out of there. Motherfuckers! They'd extended my day and work shift as my job was to clean up messes and direct people around the library. I walked towards the shelves and, with the help of Alex Scott, cleaned up the books and shelves. He was the good kid and reluctant to partake in their epic April Fool's Day prank. Thanks, I said. You're welcome. See ya, he said as he left. The process of cleaning up took 2 hours due to them breaking 3 of the shelves on the shelf. We had to put them back in and organize the books again. It was 6:57 and at this time of day, it would take an absurd time to go from Kips Bay to Attaboy with my friends. They were texting me stuff like, "Where are you? You okay, man?" I texted them back that I'd be on my way, and some little shits knocked over some shelves at work. I left the building and took an Uber to the bar. I was in a bad mood when I got to the bar. Some of my friends egged me on to get some more drinks. I was drunk in half an hour. I'm completely a dumbass when I'm drunk, so I ordered an Everclear. I was blackout drunk, it seemed. I recovered from my blackout at 8:50 maybe. My friends had paid the tab and were waiting for me to leave. I told them I had a crazy hangover, so I'd need a little more time. They told me that they were heading over to walk around Central Park for a reason I can't remember. Again, I had a hangover and had just woken up. I told them to ditch me while I sobered up. The bartender tapped my finger after they left. She told me that she had some vitamin B and some water for me. I took some and in a few, I was feeling better. I thanked her and left the bar. I didn't want to pay for an Uber or a Lyft again, so I planned to walk to Central Park myself and meet up with them. I had gotten to the edge of Central Park by the Apple Store. It was a very deserted area for the city that never sleeps. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw some scrawny-ass dude with a tank top and a bulge in his pockets. He was white and had a goatee and a clean-shaven head, and a tattoo I couldn't make out. He walked towards me and grabbed my arm. "What are you doing?" I said. The guy reached into his pocket and pulled out a switchblade. I froze. 1 second I was on my way to Central Park at night. Next, I was being held at knife point. I didn't move because I was frozen with fear. He had gross breath with yellow teeth that looked like butter. "What the fuck do you want, dude?" He motions to his shoulder where his tattoo was. It had a red swastika. He looked at me and said, "These are my streets. Go back to Africa." He called me the N-word after he told me to go back to Africa. I got even more scared, knowing this was a hate crime against me for being black. Hate is a powerful emotion, so God knows what he could do to me with that anger in his heart. My heart was pumping, and I knew if I didn't do something, I was going to be on the news. He only had hold of my arm with the blade in his hand. I looked for areas where I could hit him. I immediately kicked his crutch and ran. He fell to his knees temporarily, but got back up. He tackled me down, but I was determined not to die. I struggled and rolled with him until I was on top. I began beating him senseless. His nose was becoming bloodier by the second. A tooth fell out, and I stopped punching with one final punch to his throat. He was a bloody, wheezing mess on the ground. I wasn't looking too hot either, with a cut on my nose, my chin and cheek. In fact, I was gushing with blood from my cheek. I called 911 and they were there in 5 minutes or so. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and am back on the street. My friends apologized for leaving me, but it's not really their fault. I was too lazy to pay for an Uber.
About 4 years back, I, a male and 19 at the time, worked part-time at a very popular and well-known supermarket chain as a stockman, which is essentially just a cart jockey. To give a little context as to why I think what I saw was something very sinister, is because the town I lived in, and still do, is a tourist town that has had problems with human trafficking. A couple of the local hotels specifically get human traffickers coming through, though I don't know how often. So I was working the night shift, which was about 5 to 11 p.m, since the stockman had no reason to stick around after operating hours. Sometime after 9 and before 11, not entirely sure when exactly, but it was after my second 15-minute break, which I always took at 9, that it happened. I was out in the lot gathering the few remaining carts, as usual, before going back in to play my PSP in my hiding spot, back by the cooler we kept our waters, when a very soccer mom-looking dark blue SUV drove up into the parking lot. I'd only really noticed because at that point in the night there were usually very few cars in the lot, and most were just teenagers revving their engines to impress girls. The SUV parked about 2 rows away from me and a little up towards the entrance. I was at roughly the centre of the lot, and after the car parked, they didn't kill the engine, which is not all that unusual. But then everyone got out. There were 5 adults, 4 younger women that looked late 30s to early 40s, and 1 older man at least mid-50s, and 1 child that looked late toddler age. This is where things got a bit weird. They sort of crowded around the kid, in a sort of half circle with their backs facing the store. The kid kind of just milled around and looked up at the adults. I did my best to watch, but also looked like I was just doing my job. Thankfully, they were about 15 feet from a cart corral, so I leisurely began gathering carts and watching them. One of the women took out a sippy cup from the car. It was a clear container, so I could see the liquid was a somewhat yellowish white. They gave it to the kid, who sipped at it, but then the older man held it to the boy and lifted the bottom, forcing him to keep drinking. Every time he started to lower the cup, the older man would with one finger lift it back up until the boy continued drinking. They did this, all crowded around the boy, not saying a word, just watching, At this point I wasn't being obvious, but I wasn't really hiding that I was watching either. But no one so much as glanced at me, even though they were all facing my direction. When the boy had finished the drink, about 3 minutes of drinking straight, only stopping for the barest amount of time to breathe, one of the women took the sippy cup and returned it to the vehicle. After that, the older man took the boy, who at this point appeared a bit lethargic, and walked him into the store. The 4 women, still not talking, returned to the SUV, and each one opened one of the 4 doors and leaned over the seat. They weren't getting in. They were leaning in while still standing outside the vehicle, almost like they were smelling each of the seats. When I eventually pushed the carts by, I saw each of them were looking at their phones, which they held in the same hands that they were using to brace themselves against the seats. Each one was typing away on them, but I couldn't see their phone screens. The inside of the car was pretty bare, but there were a bunch of quilts laid out over the seats, front and back. I quickly returned to another nearby corral and kept watching. After about another 10 minutes, give or take, the older man came out again, and the boy was nowhere to be seen. He had come out completely alone. The older man wordlessly walked over to the SUV, and before he even reached it, the women had also wordlessly gotten into the vehicle. The man entered and they drove off. I wrote down the license plate number, and after walking through the store and watching the front until my shift ended at 11, the store closed at 12, and never seeing the boy again, I told my manager. I don't know if anything was done about it. Policy was that anything pertaining to reports of possibly illegal behavior is kept on a need-to-know basis, and I was just a cart pusher 3 days a week. I don't know what it was that I watched happen, but it felt wrong, and was and is the single most bizarre thing I've ever seen. This story was related to me many years ago by a friend back in Colorado, but I remember it clear as day because it was so creepy. This incident occurred in the pre-dawn hours at Red Rock's Amphitheatre, west of Denver. For those unfamiliar with it, this famous concert venue is set in the foothills west of Denver, but is actually owned by the city of Denver itself and is classed as a public park, meaning that unless there is an event, people are free to go in, look around, hike, picnic, whatever. So as long as they obey the general park laws, especially the rule against climbing on the rocks, which is dangerous, it's fine. Every so often, my friend, in his restless I-can't-sleep way, liked to drive out there early and watch the sunrise over the city. So one morning he drove out, parked up, got out of his car and went in and watched the sun come up. As he was walking back to his car, he saw another car, a Jeep, in the parking lot somewhat close to his, with someone standing next to it. He was about 60 or 70 feet away. Now, it's not terribly unusual to find 1 or 2 other cars there at weird hours. Kids out late will go there and park. Other early risers like to go jog and walk the dog, etc. But that was not this guy. No. This guy locked eyes with my friend and started slowly walking towards him. Another important piece of information. My friend always packed a gun when he went out on his early morning walks, so he was concerned by this, but not yet alarmed. "Can I help you?" he called out to the guy. No response. The guy paused for a second or two, and then resumed his slow beeline walk. "Can I help you?" my friend called again. Again, no response. But this time the guy didn't even slow down. Now my friend was getting concerned. The guy had covered about half the distance between them and still hadn't said a word. My friend put his hand in his coat pocket, where his gun was, and said in a louder voice, "Stay back, I have a gun." No response, but this made the guy stop, for about 3 seconds. Then a slightly slower advance began again. My friend pulled out his gun and held it down at his side, again saying, "I have a gun." This stopped the guy, but when he stopped, my friend heard the Jeep start. The guy wasn't alone. The Jeep started up and began slowly advancing towards the both of them. My friend was now getting very scared, but he didn't say another word. Instead, he raised the gun off towards the side, not pointing it in their direction, but clearly indicating that would be the next step. At that point, the Jeep, which was now pretty close to the creeper guy, stopped. After a long pause, still silent, the guy finally broke eye contact and slowly walked over to the Jeep's passenger side, opened the door and got in. My friend, rightly fearing being run down, kept his gun ready, but instead of chancing my friend's aim, the Jeep slowly backed up until it could turn around and leave. My friend then went back to his car, checked it for signs of break-in. There were none, and left. I asked him if that stopped him from going out to the Red Rocks in the early morning, and he said no. He still did it, and he still took his gun. But gun or not, he had more courage than I did. I live in an apartment complex in a quiet neighbourhood with my girlfriend and our dogs. A neighbour will get the occasional domestic disturbance call for an argument or loud party, but never anything particularly crazy. About a year ago, I was taking my lab outside early in the morning when we were approached by a dirty-looking guy who got out of a run-down pickup truck with no license plates. My dog is 12 and has always been the sweetest towards other humans. But for some reason, she went absolutely nuts at the mere sight of this guy. Something definitely felt off, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up at about the same time my dog showed her hackles. He waved to me and asked if I knew what apartment the girl who drives the white Equinox lives in, because he gave her a ride home last night. Needless to say, there were a few red flags here. 1. Why are you pointing to her car that's in the parking lot if you took her home? And 2, even if I knew, I'm not telling you. If you took her home and she wouldn't even let you in or tell you where she lived, that tells me all I need to know. I told him I didn't know, and I was sorry I couldn't help him. My dog still hadn't stopped barking either. But apparently that answer wasn't good enough, as he followed me into my building and said, "Come on, buddy, I just need to ask her something." I reiterated that I didn't know her and I couldn't help him, but that still wasn't good enough. He began following me up the stairs, repeating himself about the girl who drove the Equinox. At this point, it's taking everything I have to keep my dog from ripping his face off. I finally managed to pick her up and walk up the stairs, and as I got onto my floor and was opening the door to my apartment, he came through the door that separates us from the stairs and began asking in a more aggressive tone. Bear in mind, I'm taller than this guy, covered in tattoos, worked out fairly regularly at the time, and had a large dog who was snarling at him. I'm far from badass, but I'm not usually the type of person someone targets to harass. Up until this point, I was speaking to him very politely. There was clearly something off about him, and I just wanted him to go away. But messing with someone at their home is crossing the line. He kept approaching me as I was opening the door, so I finally told him, "Dude, if you come through my door, I'm gonna blow your brains out." This wasn't a bluff. I keep a handgun by the door due to some run-ins in my past. That, along with my tone of voice, was apparently enough for him to get the message, as I watched him run out the door and back to his vehicle from my window. I noticed the apartment manager, and they said they'd contact the police and figure out who drove a white Equinox in my building, so they could alert her as well. I have no idea what he intended to do had he gotten into my apartment, or what his intentions were with the girl he was looking for. I'm just glad my dog has a great sense of character.
Apologies if this doesn't flow super well, or isn't very artistically written. This Saturday, May 29th, me and my two good friends were hanging out. Every time we are together, we like to go for drives at night somewhere along this one road. Sometimes we stop by some local parks and walk around, just talking or messing around. This time, we decided to stop by a field which we planned to kick a soccer ball around in. It was around 2 a.m. and the area seemed pretty dead, except for the occasional passing car or ranger closing the park. When we arrived at the field, we noticed a newly built playground was now in the field, and we thought it would be cool just to mess around on it. First, I parked the car and faced the high beams towards the field, leaving it running so we could use it to see what we were doing. Then we got out and started passing around the soccer ball, enjoying the weird vibes of it all and having a loud conversation. After a bit, we got bored and decided to go on the playground. I reparked the car so the high beams were facing it, and once again we got out and started heading towards it. The playground constituted of a large castle-like structure in the middle, surrounded by balance obstacles, balance beams, wavy bridges, etc. We headed towards the main castle, taking our time strolling on the obstacles, again enjoying the effect the high beams had on the environment. Looking back at the car, all I could see was our silhouettes, and if you looked at the playground, our figures cast long, pitch-black shadows on the castle, adding a feeling that parts of the castle were shrouded and hidden. As I took one more step closer to the castle, however, these feelings of excitedness and mild spookiness were slightly tarnished. I was hit with the smell of cigarettes, as if someone was smoking one just in front of me. Not realizing the implications, I called out for one of my friends and told them what I smelt. They said they didn't and stepped closer. Then they smelt it too. Part joking and part serious, I said, "What if there's someone over there smoking a cigarette?" Being the skittish and on-edge kids we were, we ran back to the car, laughing and joking. Once we sat down in the car, my friend suggested we drive around and scan the playground for anyone there, as we were now extremely curious. I took the car and drove it in a circle, then back around, sweeping from the right side of the playground to the left, exposing nothing. We then realized we had left the soccer ball in the field, so I drove the car into the field and my friend stepped out and grabbed it. After this, we decided to do one last sweep and then get the hell out of there, as we were kind of spooked at this point. I scanned the playground with the high beams one last time, and then stopped the car, facing the playground. We sat there for around 15 seconds, on our phones, about to drive off when it happened. My friend sitting in the back seat was the first to see it, starting to say something like, "Do you guys see that?" And then I looked up. Underneath the wooden beams of the now ominous castle, we saw a shape, a blurry red circle with a white center, moving as if it were a person. I know that doesn't make sense, but that's all I can say. It appeared as if it started from the back of the castle and was moving in a creature-like manner towards the front of the castle, towards us. In this split second of silence as we watched this, I unconsciously slammed the car into reverse and began very quickly spinning to get 180. And now remembering that moment, I have never felt that much fear in my entire life. Something about the way that thing was moving made me feel so unbelievably petrified. My stomach felt like it was thrown off a cliff and my hair stood straight like a bed of nails. All three of us were now screaming, and I quickly and sloppily drove away. We had all seen the exact same thing. We were now driving away and began to calm down just a little, and began wondering what the fuck that thing was. I assumed it was probably some homeless guy who had went under the playground for a smoke or something. To be sure, we decided we would drive past again and try to get a better look at the playground. Maybe seeing that what we had seen was part of the playground, or maybe catching the person who had walked out from under the castle in a better light. As we came nearer to the playground, the tension began rising again, and I began to pull into the road which was connected to the parking lot. As I turned, my beams glanced over the playground for a second and then over the road. On the side of the road walked a man. He was dressed in a full sweat clothing outfit, his hood over a baseball hat, and a Swiss Army backpack. I quickly sped by him, and we felt as though we may have gotten our answer. We kept driving for a few seconds, then realized we had not seen any red on him. It was all white. I decided to turn back around and get a better look at this man, to get some closure. When I went back on the same road, he was not there anymore. I assumed he ducked into the woods or something, so I kept going back towards my friend's house, deciding to return home. Taking the turn back onto the main road though, we saw him again. This time he was walking in the complete opposite direction, unrealistically far from where we first saw him, again with his back to us. This was the cherry of weirdness on top, and we drove back home in a state of excited terror. One thing which we couldn't stop repeating was the fact that whoever or whatever that was had been there the whole time, under the castle, simply watching and listening to us. If I had simply ignored the cigarette smoke and went on the castle, they would have been under us, just observing. I could have pretty easily made this story sound much more than it was, adding the detail that the playground was built to memorialize a boy who was killed in a horrific lawnmower accident. But I don't think that would properly portray what we experienced. I have no idea what we saw, and when we got back to my friend's house, we started analyzing photos of the playground from different angles, trying to see if there was something which looked like what we saw, but we couldn't find anything. Look up Jack's Place Playground on Google Maps to find the playground.
It's a true story regarding a traumatic event in my life that has stuck with me to this day. Yesterday marked the 20th anniversary of it, so I decided to share it and get it off my chest. Some stories you can share with those close to you. Others are best only told through anonymity of the internet. This is the latter. I grew up in the 90s, a decade that I will always regard as a great era. It was the last innocent era as far as I'm concerned. The internet was there, but in its infancy, and society was a lot more friendly and sociable. Most people only had one TV in the home, and family TV time was a thing, an event to look forward to. My family were fairly poor, and so we were limited to just 4 channels: BBC One, BBC Two, ITV and Channel 4. Given the limited options, we rarely watched TV. That is until my dad came home one day with an illegal TV satellite box. What is an illegal cable box? I'm sure some of you younger readers are asking. Well, back in the day, if you had some knowledge of electrics and networking, you could construct a device that, when hooked up between a satellite and TV, could fool the satellite TV providers into thinking that you had one of their boxes, and you could watch any TV channel in the world, depending on where you positioned your satellite dish. So my dad set up the system and managed to get it working. It wasn't perfect. A lot of the channels had poor signal, and you would get lots of static noise when trying to watch them. He managed to get a few of the top sports channels, so he and his friends could watch football for free. But still, most of the other channels were very poor quality, or just static nothingness. One day when my parents were in the neighbour's backyard having a barbecue, I came back into the house because I had gotten sunburnt playing with the other kids. I was bored and wanted to watch TV, but wanted to figure out how to operate the new Satellite TV box myself. I was 8 years old and beginning to show a real interest in electronics, so found the whole thing fascinating. I flicked through channel after channel until I found Nickelodeon, but sadly the picture quality was awful. It had those black and grey squiggly lines travelling down the screen, and the sound was all tinny too. I debated going out to get my dad to come in and try to fix it, but instead opted to try myself. I had seen my dad do that search for signal stuff before, through the menu system using the remote, so I tried that. I thought I was going to succeed, but then I did something wrong and ended up losing the signal to Nickelodeon altogether. I started flicking through all the channels and realised I had wiped everything. The kids' channels, the music channels, the channels that showed my mother's favourite shows, and worst of all, my dad's sports channels. I started to really panic now, thinking my dad was going to be really upset with me after all the trouble he'd gone through to get those channels working. With this in my mind, I started frantically going through menu after menu, not even sure what I was watching, hoping to set the TV back to the way it was before I messed with it. After maybe half an hour of fiddling around, I managed to get some channels. The problem was, though, none of them were English. I couldn't tell you what countries these shows were from. It was all gibberish to my 8-year-old self. So I kept flicking through hundreds and hundreds of channels, all of them either foreign or static deafening noise, with blinding grey, black and white squiggles travelling down the screen in waves. I kept flicking forward through, until I got to one that was the clearest and crispiest of any I'd seen before. It looked like one of those medical TV dramas my mother watched, but something felt off. The set for one was pretty dark, and the clinic looked run down and abandoned. It had a kind of underground feel to it, as there were no windows, and you could practically feel the dampness of the place just by looking at it. The camera was jerky, bobbing with every step the cameraman took as they walked down a dimly lit corridor into what looked like an open ward long abandoned. Only one corner of the ward was well lit, light beaming out from behind tightly pulled curtains surrounding a bed. The cameraman approached and opened the curtain, revealing a young East Asian-looking girl sat on the edge of the bed sobbing. To her left was a middle-aged East Asian man wearing a doctor's robe, his face partially obscured with a surgical mask, holding what to me at the time was the largest needle and syringe that I had ever seen. He looked up at the cameraman, then back at the girl, who continued to look down and sob, seemingly avoiding any eye contact with the two people there with her. The man in the doctor's robe went to administer the injection, but the girl started flailing and screaming. At this point, several other adults, all in medical clothing, entered the scene and held her down on the bed. Their full bodies were not shown on camera, but it appeared to be 4 or 5 of them were holding her down as she continued to cry and scream. The camera focused in on the huge needle going into her right arm, then into her left, then both legs. She stopped resisting, and the camera then focused on her face. She was clearly drugged and drooling, her eyes staring blankly into space. I was as paralyzed as she appeared to be. I wanted to turn the TV off, but I was frozen to the spot on the rug in front of it, unable to take my eyes off the screen. The camera then zoomed out, but remained focused on the child. The people around her began talking in some foreign language, and it became clear that they were preparing for an operation of some sort. You could see latex gloves being put on, trays of tools being laid out on the bed, and a man stepped in front of the camera, blocking the view with his legs and lower back momentarily. When he stepped aside again, the girl had been moved so that she was parallel to the camera, giving us a left sideways view of her. She was clearly awake, her eyes rolling around inside their sockets as she looked around, but was fairly still unable to move. Then the saw appeared. First they removed her right arm and cauterized the stump with a blowtorch. Then they began removing her left arm, and the camera focused in on her face. Tears were streaming from her eyes, and her lips were quivering. I threw up and started sobbing myself as I now watched these people saw off her legs. Once all wounds were cauterized, the camera panned out again to show the girl totally limbless. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I felt violated having just watched it. I couldn't make sense of it. Things went quiet. Nothing seemed to be going on, and the cameraman had stopped moving and was just focused on the girl laying on the bed. I thought it was over. I was wrong. A man stepped into view holding an electric drill, and the others entered the frame again a moment later. They proceeded to drill holes in each side of the girl's hips and then in both of her shoulders. They inserted some metal things in there that looked like big bolts. Once these things were inserted, they then dressed the wounds and the screen went black. It was black for a while, and I was still frozen in shock on the rug, too scared to get up. And I realized I had pissed myself. After some time, believing the horror I had seen to be over, I wanted to get up and change my pants. I was going to go straight to my bedroom, change my pants, go next door and get my parents, and that's what I told myself I was going to do now. That this was over. But it wasn't over. The screen came back to life. The camera showed a concrete floor for a moment, then panned up to show a medical team, all wearing scrubs and surgical masks, holding the limbless girl in the air. The room was different, smaller and not as well lit. They were fitting her into some kind of metal frame, an endoskeleton kind of thing. It's hard to describe, but at the time it reminded me of those metal Meccano things that you could build your own model of roller coasters out of. It was a steel-looking frame which the girl was being fitted into, and two people held her up whilst others on either side screwed the frame into the sockets that they had implanted into the girl's hips and shoulders. When they were done, she was a floating torso inside of the metal frame, and next all the people left the frame, apart from the main man that gave the girl the injection. His face was still partially obscured with the surgical mask, and he began talking to the camera in very broken English, explaining that the metal frame could be adjusted in a number of ways to alter the body position of the girl. He then proceeded to show these different positions, lowering and raising her, spinning her around so that her front and then her back were no longer upright, but parallel with the floor. The man then went on to start sexually abusing the girl, and I won't go into detail about that part. As this was going on, I heard my mother scream, and I spun around to see her standing in the doorway of the living room. I was both relieved to see her, but at the same time felt like I had been caught witnessing possibly the worst evil imaginable. To this day I still cannot fully understand how I felt at that moment. My mother dragged me out of the room, and she was hysterical. She hugged me close, and at the same time screamed questions at me, asking me what I was doing, why I was watching that, etc. My dad got involved after that, hearing my mother scream. I got sent upstairs to my room, and my parents had the biggest fight of their life. She called the police and they came round. I was questioned a little bit at my house, but was taken to the police station to be questioned by a child specialist. My parents were taken in for questioning too. Neither were charged, but my dad was fined for the illegal satellite box. They took both the box and the dish, and my mother told me a few years ago that they'd nearly broken up that day. So there you go. That's the most messed up thing I've ever seen. I felt sick just typing this out. I am curious though. Have any of you ever seen anything like this back in the day? There were a lot of dodgy channels back in the Wild West days of cable and satellite TV. Anytime we have holidays, my older brother, my dog and I take a long trip over to our grandmother's house, and this particular visit took place over autumn break when I was 12 years old. The first few days were great. I spent my time reading the books that I had brought with me and browsing through gossip magazines. One morning, however, my brother got a very bad rash that needed medical attention that the town was not able to provide. So my brother and grandmother were forced to get in the car and drive to the nearest hospital, which was a long ways away. Pretty soon it became clear that they weren't going to be back by nightfall, and I would have to spend the night alone in the big dark house with no one to keep me company except for my dog, whose name is Polaris. I had always been afraid of specific parts of the house, such as the basement and the attic, although at night the whole house would become engulfed in darkness, with many shadowy corners and corridors, and due to this I would be reluctant to go carry out my nightly routine or other tasks in the dark. This night was no different. I turned on the light in my second-floor bedroom, closed the door, and resolved to stay there until morning. To my misfortune, it wouldn't be as simple as that. I was sitting in bed reading, Polaris snoring soundly by my side, when I heard slow, quiet thumps on the stairs. My first instinct was that I was imagining things, but I was still frightened enough to nudge Polaris awake. Instantly he perked his ears up and started growling. Now I knew I wasn't imagining the sound. But the fact that Polaris was now growling unsettled me even more, since he is a happy dog that would greet even a stranger by the door as a long-lost friend. The thumps were loud and clear now, and I thought that someone must have broken in and was climbing the stairs slowly. But I knew that that couldn't be true. I hadn't heard anyone come in, and I had made sure to call my grandmother and brother before settling in bed. Eventually the thumps stopped, but I didn't dare open my bedroom door to ease the tension. I was too scared to come face to face with something I could have avoided. In a couple of hours I was able to fall asleep, although I'm not sure how long that lasted before I was awoken to a creaky corridor door being swung open, and once again being slow but definite. My heart was beating so fast and loud, it made it harder to hear what was going on. But nevertheless, I heard the wooden floor right outside my bedroom creak, and then slowly walk away into the next room. I fell asleep in short fever-like intervals. The dreams I was having couldn't be described as anything short of demonic. Yet the thing I remember to this day is the old woman that I saw in many of those dreams. She had very small, beady black eyes and messy grey hair. She kept trying to touch me around my waist, my hair, my arms, everywhere. And as often happens in dreams, I couldn't get away. Due to the hag I dreamt, I am inclined to believe that it may have been her walking around the house. If you think you can provide any insight into this experience, please do. I really would be glad to hear anything similar you have gone through. This happened years ago at my middle school while I was in 7th grade. One thing you need to know about my middle school is that it's in the middle of a big city. This meant that the school property lines were narrowed down to literally only 20 feet from any school building or field. Therefore, there were always strangers walking around right outside the school because there's lots of bus stops and parks, etc. Also, aside from the main building, we had a ridiculous amount of portables, about 50 in all organised into rows right next to the soccer field, which is also really close to public city domain. So my friends and I, 12 and 13 at the time, all had the same first period in one of the portables. So we would always hang outside of it before class started, no matter the weather. One day in the winter, we noticed a big hole in the side of the portable. It was towards the bottom corner and out of direct view, but because we hung around there so much, we noticed it. We couldn't figure out why the heck it had got there, because it certainly wasn't natural, other than if some animal had made the hole themselves to live under there. One of my friends joked, maybe it's a human, to which we all laughed, because we knew it was impossible, as only one of our scrawny friends could probably fit through, judging by the size of it, let alone a full-grown man. We would joke in class that we could hear noises coming from under the portable, just little scratches and bumps that were mostly muffled by the class's chatter, and this went on for a couple of months. Well, one day my friends and I got to the portable to hang out before first period, just like we always did, when our teacher came out of the portable and told us we couldn't hang out here any longer. At first we thought it was because we were too loud or something like that, but she had a look of concern, almost fear on her face. When we asked her why, she told us that after school yesterday, the janitors were cleaning up around the portables as usual when they saw the hole in the bottom and decided to inspect it. To their surprise, they found a man living under there, skinny and covered in dirt. He was obviously homeless. The local police came and escorted him out, while the janitors cleaned out his hole and covered it with plyboard. We then all looked down at the hole and noticed it was indeed covered with 2 or 3 pieces of plyboard, and we all just kind of froze and looked at each other. Our stupid little joke was actually real this whole time. A fully grown man was living under this middle school portable for at least a couple of months, right under our noses. He was probably harmless like most homeless people are, just people down on their luck, and oftentimes with untreated mental illnesses. But no one's certain, and our teacher wouldn't give up any more information than that, not commenting on any of the stuff that was found in the hole where he lived when we asked. What's confusing though, is that there are about 5 or 6 abandoned portables here as well. You can easily tell because they are nasty on the outside. Why couldn't he have chosen one of those rather than the one that nearly constantly has kids in it, and the only one with a group of kids that hang outside of it every morning? I still think about that sometimes. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.